welcome to Food for Thought. Today my guest is Frank Zappone. Frank is our deputy supervisor in the town of Southampton, and actually you've been there for before me, right?
10 years.
10 years, oh my gosh, yeah. So Frank and I have worked together for that time and always had a great working relationship, and I'm thankful that you came on today. And you're going to be making, I'm going to let you say it because you say it best.
Caponatina.
That's it, I couldn't say that. So we're going to be making that today, and what is that, just so everybody gets a sense?
Caponatina, more commonly known as caponata, is a typical Italian side dish made just about everywhere in Italy. The differences are everything's regional. So if you're down south where my parents come from, you'll find fennel and green olives. If you're up north, you won't see the fennel. You might see some tomato sauce and black olives.
Oh, wow.
Down south, they'll use balsamic vinegar. Up north, you might use a white wine vinegar or a red wine vinegar.
Okay.
So the dish is universal, but it changes depending on the local ingredients of the region of Italy that you're getting it from.
Are the tastes really very different, or are they just a little subtle kind of?
The tastes are significantly different. The northern version with a red wine vinegar is generally naturally sweet. Also in the Neapolitan area, they'll add tomato sauce to it.
Okay.
In the southern region, it's more of a sweet and sour because it's preserved better over time. And in the early days when they didn't have adequate refrigeration, that preservation was a good thing. In the colder climes, they didn't have to worry about that so much. So there are some subtle differences. This is more of a sweet and sour version.
So why don't you walk us through how you would start this if you were at home?
Okay, so the finished version of the caponatina, served as a side dish, or it can be served, as it often is, on toasted crusty bread as a sort of a crustina, and you would serve it on that crusty bread. It could be served as an hors d'oeuvre or as a side dish as part of a main meal. And the main ingredient is eggplant. This one large eggplant and the other ingredients we have would make a serving sufficient for 4 to 6, maybe even 8 people, depending how you serve it.
Okay.
Capers, large green olives. The Sicilian version, which we're making today, includes anise or fennel, a garlic clove, onion, some
Pesto, is it?
pesto, yes, thank you. Brain freeze there for a moment. The sweet and sour comes from a combination of balsamic vinegar and the sugar, which is in this bowl, and mushrooms.
That's great. Now, do these have, I know that these come very often with pimentos in them. Are these, don't have them. Is that okay?
These do not. These are
variation.
You can get any variation of olive that you like. The pimento would add a little bit of sweetness. I get the unpitted, if you can buy the can or the jar pitted, but you have to take the pits out. Not a task that I enjoy doing. So I make it with the pitted, which you can buy in the deli counters, and often a lot of our supermarkets, they'll have different varieties of olives. And the one ingredient I forgot to mention, which is important, is the celery, because the celery adds a texture and a crunchiness to the caponatina that I particularly enjoy, and I think others do as well.
Okay, great. So just in terms of cooking times, just walk us through how you would start, which vegetables you would start with, and about how approximate size that you would use for dicing, or assuming you're
Right. Well, you start with the eggplant,
Okay.
because the eggplant has to be fried, but not deep fried. So it takes the longest to cook.
Okay.
So this takes, to get it ready to be included in the other ingredients, takes about 20-25 minutes, and then adding the other things take another 20 or 25 minutes, so 45 minutes to an hour, the meal is ready. It's just the cooking time, the preparation isn't all that sophisticated.
And then how long does that last? I mean, it's 45 minutes, but it's...
Put it in the refrigerator. You can continue to serve that for 2 or 3 weeks.
Oh, super.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Keeping it in a sealed container in the refrigerator.
Okay.
So an eggplant like this, of course, it has to be rinsed, and that's already been taken care of. You cut off the ends. Move those over to the side. Yeah, we can put those there. Then I find it easier to cut the eggplant in half.
It's a serious knife, so just be careful
Yeah.
with your fingers.
Place it on the cutting board, and in light of that caution, I'm going to put my glasses on.
Thank you.
Okay, and then I cut it long ways. And then cut it in 1-inch strips.
Okay. Should we throw this out for you? We can use that too. Now, Frank, when did you all used to have this as growing up, or I'm assuming it's something that your family made?
Well, yes, I grew up in an Italian household, as you might imagine. My grandmother and grandfather lived in the house with us. My grandmother and grandfather were from Sicily. And my mother was often the one who did the cooking. And unlike today, we didn't have video games to play or even a TV at home when I was a young boy. So we'd get home from school, and my mom would have all of these things laid out. My brother and sister and I have an older brother and sister. She would give me the celery and say, chop this up for caponatino. She'd give my brother the eggplant. And they would keep us busy. But also you learned about the cooking indirectly. You know, I don't have a written recipe, and I remember a bunch of years ago my sister said, gee, I wish I could remember how Mom made the caponatina. And I said, well, I remember. So I started making it. And now when we have Christmas and Thanksgiving dinner, anticipation coming up next week, I get a phone call from my sister, are you bringing the caponatina?
Oh, that's nice.
Of course, Christmas not so much because we have the 7 fishes thing going on.
Oh,
but,
we do that too.
But everybody enjoys it.
That's nice.
So you would cut the eggplant into slices about this size. The technique I use, they come out fairly consistent. You do not peel the skin off. It's important to keep the skin on. It provides a kind of bitterness that's good for the taste. I like it. And it also keeps it firm. Otherwise, it would get very mushy when you start to cook it. And then you have to prepare the anise or fennel. The fennel has a stem on it, which is very coarse.
Yeah, I always get, I get the fennel. I'm always like questioning how to approach it.
Yeah, and usually sometimes when you buy them in the store, there are long fennel fronds on it. They're tasty in a salad, but they're not useful for this particular dish. So I cut the stems off.
Okay, so you cut this in half originally.
I've cut it in half. It's a larger bulb.
Right. Okay.
And then there is a hard core on the fennel, and I try to remove that just by taking that out.
Okay.
Okay. And then you can also an easy way to do this is to use a mandolin.
Oh yeah. Okay.
So you can cut it very thinly. I didn't
Please
bring
watch your fingers.
I didn't bring my mandolin.
I actually have one, but I would have to.
So you just can try to cut it in thin slices, like so, until it's completely cut.
Okay.
That one size is an adequate amount for the recipe that we're making today.
Okay, great.
Normally what I would do, and I'll say this if it's helpful, is I'll prepare all of this, put it in the bowl, and throw it in there. While it's cooking, I do the chopping of everything else. So when you
Now
put
these
this,
are big though, no?
yeah, I'm gonna trim those. They shrink up quite a bit. when you
I'll
cook
leave
them.
them if you want.
Yeah, that's fine. They're good. They're going to be fine.
Okay.
But when you put them in, just grab a handful and put them in slowly because they're still a little moist.
Okay.
You don't want it to spatter.
When do you want them to go in?
3 cups of canola oil. Why canola oil is it doesn't burn and it's lighter. Olive oil would make the dish much too heavy, but you do use olive oil in the sautéing later on.
Okay.
Okay.
You might have
That's
to.
ready to put
It is ready? Okay.
Okay.
Okay,
All
so
right, so you put in a skillet of this approximate size. You can do a slightly smaller skillet, but not much larger. Preferably one with high walls and deep sides. And you can hear the oil begin to sizzle. We use 3 cups of canola oil for this particular recipe.
and you recommend doing that as opposed to using the olive oil because it becomes too heavy at that point?
Yes,
with
and
the
olive
eggplant?
oil tends to smoke and burn at a lower temperature. So the canola oil works a lot better, and it doesn't get absorbed so heavily into the eggplant.
Okay.
Now, I put a couple of drops of water when you start to hear that sizzle, but another way to test it is to throw in 1 piece of the eggplant, and as you start to see it bubble around the sides, as this one
Look
is,
how fast it absorbs too.
you can, it's pretty much ready.
Okay,
And you want to be careful when you add the eggplant because the eggplant tends to hold
Has a lot of
moisture,
water, yeah.
and you don't want it to spatter. So we're going to add the eggplant carefully.
Okay.
And now that we've cooled the oil down, we can add the rest.
Great.
Use your ladle to spread it evenly. It doesn't have to be submerged in the oil. You're frying it, but not deep frying it. And as you'll see, as it cooks, each piece will shrink in size, and all of
Becomes
the
almost translucent.
yeah, all of the eggplant will be bathed in the canola oil over time.
Okay.
And while that's cooking, which takes about 20 minutes to cook, then you return and prepare the other ingredients, the chopping and cutting of the other ingredients, just keeping this close by and keeping an eye on it.
Okay, super. All right, so then why don't we go back to doing that?
So as we continue with the preparation, you want to cut the fennel.
That's good. He's getting close to his fingers. That little piece of core.
And then the onion.
And they have about, excuse me, they have about the same cooking time.
Have about the same cooking time. When you start cooking the ingredients in addition to the fennel, and excuse me, the eggplant, you start with the celery, which I'm going to cut because that takes the longest to cook.
Okay.
Then you throw the olives in. They take a little bit longer. And then together you put in the fennel and the onion, the olive oil, excuse me, the mushrooms, 1 clove of garlic, a tablespoon of pesto, and a small bottle of drained small capers, not the large ones. The large ones add too much texture and bitterness, so the baby or tiny capers are the best.
Super.
So you cut the onion in much the same way.
I'm just going to give a stir to the eggplant.
Please do. Thank you for paying attention to that. You'll start to see it brown around the edges, but all of them are going to have to be a golden brown before we remove it, Christine.
So Frank, let's talk about what wonderful work you do for us on every day, not just cooking. You can do that while you're slicing away there. What about the job keeps you so engaged as you are? Because I know that for us, having you there is such a great asset to us, because we all look to you for everything that we can't answer, as you know happens quite often, or you have to translate for us what someone's saying.
Well, I appreciate the nickname, the translator, that you've given me. You know, what I like to say about the job when people ask me that question, it's a job where I love it because you have no idea what's going to happen on any given day.
It's true.
I also find that on my most disappointing days, it's because I never know what's going to happen on any given day. So that's the beauty and the beast of the job. But you guys have been very good to me over the years, and the previous board as well, because you allow me to get engaged in projects that are of interest to me. You know, so the capital projects like the Ponquag Bridge and the Beach Pavilion and Good Ground Park, I enjoy doing that. Some of the policy work that we do with regard to the Water Quality Fund and interaction with the community and working with the civic organizations, all of these things bring great diversity. And over the years, I have a good working relationship with our town attorney's office, which the town board works with a great deal, our planning department, which is integral. So I get the opportunity to see how all the parts move and fit together and accomplish what the public sees as board members making decisions at public meetings.
I really appreciate all the work that you do, because as you were just saying, I mean, you interface really with all the departments, and you bring us everything, and you kind of really just get to the point with us and are able to lay things out that you've already kind of vetted through. So you just bring the stuff that helps us make our policy decisions or whatever decisions we're making on resolutions, and I'm appreciative of that, and particularly with the capital projects. We have so many going on.
Yes, we do.
In the
Quite
last
a
couple
few.
of years,
Yeah.
In particular, and you've just been a tremendous, as I said, asset to
Well,
us.
and I
So
appreciate that.
it's
As
very
the
much
saying goes, I
appreciated.
work at the pleasure of the board, and it's a pleasure to work
that's
for
nice.
the
That's
board.
good. That's
So
good to
it's
hear.
good. It's good for me.
Good. All right.
In
So
the
I'm
meantime,
going to double check the eggplant.
check the oven there, young lady, and I'm going to continue cutting up this whole
Okay,
onion.
it's definitely starting to brown now.
Christine, you cut this in approximately the same slices that you cut the fennel or the anise, and you can add it to the same bowl.
Why do some people call it anise and some people call it fennel? I always get tripped up when I go into the supermarket because I'll
I think
invariably ask for the wrong.
anise is the more technical name because it's a flavoring and a spice that people are familiar with. I think the plant, I'm not 100% sure about this, but the plant is fennel, and in Italian, I know how to say it, I wouldn't know how to spell it. It's called finocchia, which is the translation of the word fennel into it. At least, I should say in Sicilian, because that's the Italian I learned at home.
Right.
And any Italian will tell you Sicilian is not really Italian. And any Sicilian will tell you Italian is not really Sicilian. So you have all this prepared and it's in the same bowl.
Okay.
What I like to do, and you don't have to, but it's a preference I have because that's the way I was taught. The whole olives, first of all, they're little. These are the jumbo or giant
Yeah, they look
olives,
bigger.
and they're a little hard on the appetite especially when you spread it on a piece of bread. So I find it very effective to take the caper jar, or you can even use the balsamic vinegar jar. I don't use this one because it has a crowned bottom, and you wouldn't get very much.
Okay.
And I
So like you
squash
did
them.
before you squashed them.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that and there's one that's already done. I'll do the rest of these just quickly. Stand back. It tends to
Standing back,
splatter.
and attend to the eggplant again.
You've got the uniform. Let's take a look at that eggplant, Christine. Do a couple more.
It's getting there. It's starting to golden, a little bit.
Yeah. So this color here,
Yeah.
they'll all be about the same color
Okay.
in a short period of time.
Super.
So I can finish. I'm not sure you wanna. And Christine, while you're smashing those, why don't you continue to smash those?
Okay.
There's just a few left.
Yeah.
And what did I
Here,
do?
we have 2 cutting boards, so why don't you take
There's the
that
little
one for
jar.
the celery?
Okay. And I probably need a little bowl for this as well.
Okay.
This is 1 small stalk of celery. So it's about 10 or 8 pieces of celery stalk. And since these are fresh from the supermarket, we know they need to be rinsed. So
I think you're a little bit better at this.
as a girl, get serious with this. Okay, so the celery stalks are going to be chopped a little bit less than an inch, 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch.
So that's a celery heart, right?
Yep.
Okay. So drop those in there. So one more time, check the eggplant because now it's really coming up. You hear it sizzling away over there.
Okay, so now you have all of your ingredients. You
Okay.
have the olives, the mushrooms, the celery, the fennel, and the
Onion.
chopped and the onions.
And the
The only
capers.
other thing that the capers are here. The only other little thing we need is 1 clove of garlic.
It's fun, 1 clove and you put it in such a big dish. It gives so much flavor. You
Yeah.
underestimate it
Yeah,
sometimes.
especially and what I try to do is slice it as thin as possible.
Oh, okay.
Because you add it to the ingredients, you don't just put it in the pan, and when you slice it very thin, it tends to dissolve.
Oh, that's great.
And when it dissolves, it adds flavor to the entire dish. Now, some people, may I borrow that?
Yeah.
Some people take the onion clove and
garlic?
smash, the garlic clove, and smash it,
Yeah.
which is another technique you can use. I find that you can't disperse it in the dish so readily, and if it's not a really fresh garlic, that smashing tends to squirt all the oils out of
Oh,
it,
yeah.
and you lose some of the flavor of the
Okay.
garlic. And
That's good to know.
being Italian,
You don't want to lose any flavor.
I love my garlic
Yeah,
flavor.
you're not going to want to lose any flavor.
So we're ready to check the eggplant.
Okay.
It's
You
got
tell me if this is how you
got a
like
little
to
bit
see
more
it.
time. Needs a little bit more time.
It smells good.
This is probably going to need 5 or so more minutes.
Okay.
Okay. Now the
Well,
only
you
thing.
said 20, so that would put us at.
The only thing that we don't have, and maybe you have something here, when we are finished, we're going to take the eggplant out of
Put it
there
into another bowl.
and put it into another bowl with a paper towel on, and then we need to dispose of the oil. Of it.
Does the bitterness from the eggplant come out into the oil?
Some of it when you cook it. What really draws the bitterness out of it, surprisingly, is when you add the sweet and sour component of the balsamic vinegar and the sugar.
Okay.
The sugar acts as a drawing agent.
Oh, okay.
So it has a nice exchange. It still remains somewhat tart, but that's a flavor that you like. But it's not as tart as if it was just the vinegar all by itself.
Okay.
And we can.
I don't want to touch it too much and break it apart.
Yeah.
Got to be careful of that, right?
Now,
That's
most
a
of
beautiful
them are
golden
going to be
brown.
about that
Can you
that
go
color.
with that?
Yeah,
That's
we're looking for
beautiful.
them to get closer to that color.
Okay.
And it's like everything else that you put in high oil heat like this, you'll look at it, turn away, and look back, and all of a sudden they're all
It's
ready.
ready.
You know, so it comes quickly. It's getting close. And,
So this is really the color that we're looking for.
yeah, you want each of the eggplant slices to get this golden brown color, and it's not only a nice texture and appearance, but it sort of holds them together because the eggplant is kind of delicate when it freshly comes out of the oil. When we're going to take it out in a few minutes and put it in this bowl with a paper towel, and it'll drain. And as the moisture drains out of it, they tend to firm up even further.
Oh, super. Okay.
So
Yeah, I was wondering how that was gonna
you can use a
work.
slotted spoon or a spider.
Spider?
And what I would do when you did this is just turn the flame off completely. Just as a precaution, let the bubbling oil settle down a little bit so you don't burn yourself or splatter it on your clothing. And we'll just wait a couple of seconds until that simmers down a little bit. And we can begin to slowly remove this.
And you do have to be a little bit cautious with it because you don't want it to break up
Yeah.
in pulling it out.
And sometimes if you have a metal slotted spoon, because it has a keener edge,
Right.
you can use that as well. But you'll see how nicely the
Really
pieces,
beautiful.
individual pieces, hold together, and
Yeah.
that golden brown color is aesthetically very appealing.
Now, we were saying before, because obviously the inclination is to be able to reuse the oil, but in this case, we can't reuse the oil. We're going to start with a fresh
No.
batch.
When oils like this have been heated to that level, and you do cool them, they tend to turn rancid very quickly. So you don't even want to run the risk of it. A few more pieces.
Gosh, looks great.
I'll just let that sit for a second, Christine.
Okay.
Let it simmer down a little bit further. And you would need, because the oil is quite hot, you would need some kind of a ceramic bowl, or as my mother used to use, an empty tomato can, something that could handle the heat and that can be disposed of later. This obviously is not going to be disposed of later, but olive oil canola oil has to be disposed of properly.
Okay.
The safest way to do it is to put the container in the sink. In the event something happens,
It's down there. Right?
it's in the drain, and of course you have close access to water if you need to reduce the heat in any way, shape, or form. It's more of a safety precaution than
Okay.
anything else. And you would take the pan and slowly pour the oil
Yeah, this is never my favorite part, but you did that very adeptly. Super. And then just let it sit there.
and let it sit there until it cools.
Okay.
Now let the pan cool down just a little bit, and because we're now going to use olive oil, you want the full flavor of the olive oil, and you don't want to dilute it at all. Try to clean up as much of the canola oil as you can. It doesn't have to be washed, because you're going to clarify. If you wanted to look at the pan, you see there's some crusting on the bottom of the pan. When you add the olive oil, you're going to clarify some of that, and it'll become part of the flavoring for the caponatina. Okay, while the pan is cooling, we're going to add about 2 tablespoons of olive oil. That's 2 tablespoons. Return the heat and start to heat that olive oil.
All right, so we've moved over to sautéing at this point. How much oil did you put in there?
We put in about 2 tablespoons of olive oil,
Okay.
and I left some of the dregs of the frying of the eggplant in there,
right.
because that'll clarify later when you add some liquid to this, and it also adds to the whole flavor of the caponatina. So when this is heated up slightly, you start by adding the ingredients that take the longest to cook. In this case, it would be the celery, the onion, and the fennel or anise. And you just start cooking those ingredients until the onion will cook the fastest. When the onion slices begin to get translucent, then you start to add the other ingredients, and that takes about 5 minutes.
Does it help to cover them at this point, or do you
Not
keep
yet.
it open? Okay.
Not yet. You can see that the moisture coming out of the celery in particular is beginning to
deglaze the pan.
deglaze the pan. Yep.
That's great, because it's all flavor. You haven't added any water or
Right.
anything. That's awesome. Okay.
Okay, I think this is getting to the point. You can also feel when you start to stir it that everything gets a little bit softer. You can see some of the onion slices
Yeah, starting to caramelize.
starting to caramelize a little bit. So when you get to that point, you're going to add the olives,
Okay.
stir them in. You're going to add the mushrooms.
And they're going to give off a lot of liquid.
Mm-hmm.
When do you put the garlic in, at the end?
We're going to do that soon. You're going to add the capers. Get all the ingredients to interact with each other. Okay, I'm going to add the garlic, but before you add the garlic and the pesto, you want to turn the heat
Up or
down a little bit,
Okay.
because garlic tends to burn very quickly, and you don't want, and that steals it of its flavor. So you want to put the garlic in, and doing this the old-fashioned way, you want to take some pesto. That's about 2 teaspoons of pesto.
Okay.
Now, can I just grab me a piece of paper towel?
Is it
Can I
just
use
towel?
that?
Yeah, use the towel. Everything gets washed.
Okay. All right, now you want to Mix all of those ingredients with each other. And let those begin to enjoy each other's company a little bit. And at this point, with the heat lowered, you're going to cover it and keep it covered until you start to see some water accumulate on the top of the pan. That's why it's nice to use a clear glass cover so you can see that accumulate.
Yeah.
That takes a couple of minutes. And while that's heating up and creating some moisture, you want to prepare what makes it sweet and sour.
Okay.
You have the 2 teaspoons of sugar in a bowl about this size.
2 heaping teaspoons, right?
2 heaping teaspoons of sugar. And you add what is the equivalent of about 2/3 of a cup of balsamic vinegar. And this bowl would represent just about that amount. And I'm going to need that. There was a little fork somewhere. You want
It's
to
in the eggplant. Here you go.
use a fork. Just stir that until the sugar gets dissolved. Now, you can take the little bowl of balsamic vinegar and give it 15 seconds in the microwave so it gets a little warmer.
Okay.
I don't generally do that. The balsamic vinegar is so acidic that it dissolves the sugar pretty readily.
Okay.
Now that's a flavor that I like. For some people, and we'll get a chance to taste some of this later, it's a little too bitter for them. You can always add a little sugar. Just sprinkle it over another half a teaspoon of sugar and season it to taste. It won't affect the overall flavor.
After it's made.
After it's all
okay,
made.
That's good to know.
It will take some of the
People can adjust
sourness
to their
away, so you
liking.
can adjust it to your own taste.
Okay.
So we're going to go back. You can see that the frying pan cover has begun to accumulate some moisture, and that's going to help tenderize the vegetables that are in there and also help to glaze the pan. So you want that to drain.
All those juices in there. Okay.
And you can start to get a sense of the aroma that comes out of all of the different ingredients that are there.
Yeah.
There's not, the pan is still a little dry, so I'm going to do that just one more time to get a little more moisture in there. When the northern Italians make this dish at this point, they would add either a small can of tomato
So I
paste.
was going to say that's what my aunt did.
Right,
Naples.
or half a cup to 2/3 of a cup of marinara sauce, not sauce with meat in it, because this is a complete vegetable dish, and it changes the color, it changes the texture. It also adds some sweetness to it because the tomato sauce is got its own natural sweetness from the tomato plant. So, but I don't. The southern version, Sicilian version, doesn't add that.
Okay.
And the difference is in name. If you go to the store, you can buy this dish in a jar. And it's always called caponata. And you will see that it has a reddish color to it, because the more common recipe is the northern Italian recipe.
There's no varying similarity to flavor, I can tell you that, between homemade and...
Yeah,
What you get
and
in the jar.
caponatina is the Sicilian version of the same dish. So we're going to wait a few minutes for this to accumulate a little bit more moisture.
Did you want to talk about the bread that you prepared
Yeah.
in advance? Because
Sure,
we're going to be
we
using
can do
that
that.
to serve.
My favorite way to enjoy caponatina is on a crusty piece of hearty bread. I often use a Tuscan loaf. This is the first time I've ever tried it. It looks wonderful. Is a piece of sourdough bread with a very coarse crust,
Yeah, it's good.
but not a dense dough in the center. That would add too much to the weight of the crostini. This has been coated with a little bit of olive oil and toasted for just a few minutes in the oven, so it has a firmness to it. The caponatina has got a lot of moisture in it, so you need a hearty piece of bread that can hold on to that moisture. Otherwise, it'll end up just being like a piece of French toast, and you really want it firmer than that. So you would, when we're done, we can add this by the spoonful, serve it on a plate, and a piece like this with a layer of caponata and a little glass of
Vino?
Montepulciano, and it makes a very lovely lunch. All right, so now again we see that the cover has accumulated some moisture inside. We're going to remove the cover again and let that moisture drain in. We're going to turn off the gas completely. We're going to return the eggplant. Mix all the ingredients together.
You know, this is a side dish, and as said with the crostini, but I mean, you serve this in a salad too. It's a lunch, it's a light supper, anything like that.
Absolutely. When the crostini, when the caponata is all done, you'll put it in a serving dish, preferably a glass or ceramic dish. And the best thing to do is to take it before you serve it and keep it in the refrigerator for 20, 30 minutes. So that it's close to room temperature. And then it can be served as part of a salad, it can be served as a side dish, it can be served as topping on a sandwich. There are lots of different ways to use it. So now as the last stage, with the heat off and all of the ingredients in one pan, you're going to drizzle the balsamic vinegar and sugar over the top of it. You're going to stir all of this, and you'll see that it starts to change color.
Oh, yeah.
It gets a darkish brown color.
It happens fast.
And with the heat off, but still quite warm, you're going to cover it one last time and let it sit like that until the pan is cool to touch.
Okay.
This continues the marrying of the different flavors of the different vegetables with each other and generates a little bit more moisture.
Okay, great.
So you just let that sit there, covered. It takes 20 or so minutes for the pan to be cool to the touch.
Okay, great. And we have part of it that's already been prepared that you did in advance. Thank you for doing that. And it looks wonderful and it looks ready. Let me get.
So when the
get a spoon.
caponata is ready to be served, this has been taken from the pan, put in a serving dish, and kept in the refrigerator for about 30 minutes so that it gets to room temperature. If you have to leave it in overnight where it gets cooler, you certainly can enjoy it that way, but you really get the full benefit of all the flavors when it's at room temperature. So take it out of the refrigerator an hour or so before you want to serve it and put it out on the counter so that it gets room temperature. And the best way I enjoy serving this is on a nice piece of hard, slightly toasted, coarse bread that's been coated with olive oil and toasted in the oven. And we can serve this. You'll see that as a result of having stayed in the pan, you might be able to see that there's a great deal of moisture that is accumulated. And that's why you need a coarse piece of bread, because that bread will get
Oh, that looks fabulous.
quite soft.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. And because I don't like to see you dine alone.
No, I don't like eating alone. You know that. It's fabulous.
There you go.
Have a little
Now,
taste.
you can do that the old-fashioned way, or you can get yourself a knife and fork and
Do you
cut a
want a
little.
knife and fork?
No,
I'm just
I
gonna
don't
go
really.
for it.
I'm going to steal this fork, though.
That is good. That is really good. And the bread's good.
Yes.
The sourdough is really good too, but the caponatina is excellent. You get the sweet, you get the tart. The vegetables keep their individual textures. And it's really good. That's a meal.
And a closer look at it, you can see the individual ingredients still retain their individuality, although they're all coated with the balsamic vinegar. The, the onions and the mushrooms, excuse me.
The vinegar gets you.
Yeah, I like it tart like this, but to some it might be too tart. Even at this point, you could take a tablespoon of sugar, sprinkle it over the top. It would dissolve almost instantly. Stir it well, and it will tweak the flavor just a little bit.
That's great. Awesome. Thank you
You're
so
welcome.
much for doing this. You're amazing. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Food for Thought.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.